Their nervous system state is not always the same. On a windy day, if they're sore, if we recognize that and meet that, then it's amazing the horse that knows that you know that and what can come out.
Most people talk about training as if it is happening to their horse. Dr. Stephen Peters talks about training from what is happening to your horse's brain. That's a completely different conversation. Stephen is a neuropsychologist and one of my favorite people to sit down with if I want to really understand my horses. I mean, what's going on in their head, how their brain chemistry works, and why certain reactions or behaviors are scientifically inevitable. Today, we dive into learned helplessness, myelination, and why horse behavior is always a message from the nervous system.
Welcome to the Noel Floyd Podcast. It's Dr. Stephen Peters.
Before we begin today's episode, I'd love to ask for your support. The simplest way to support this podcast is to hit follow or subscribe wherever you are listening. It helps the show reach more people who care about the same things that we do. Better horsemanship, deeper conversations, and a more thoughtful future for horses and the people who love them. And if this podcast has meant something to you, leaving a rating, a review, or a comment makes a huge difference. So thank you for being here. I really do not take your time or attention for granted. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Every time we sit down, I feel like you help me understand my world and my horse's world a lot better, but you do it from a scientific point of view, which is so important.
I feel strongly about critical thinking, and I can empathize with everyone who's trying to make sense of all the information that's out there. And it doesn't weigh the same.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't have scientific backing, then we're much less confident in what we have to say. And why is that important? Well, wrong information can have harmful consequences.
Absolutely.
Right? Some things we want to believe so badly, we're going to believe them anyway. So if unicorns and things that touch our heartstrings, or my horse can sense the rays coming from me and we resonate at the same frequency, and this can happen even if we're in different states, and you can have bits and pieces, kernels of scientific information, but when you wrap them too tightly in lots and lots of bologna, you still end up with a bologna sandwich instead of the accurate science. So I'm actually creating a podcast of mine called The Skeptical Horseman.
Yeah.
I'll be doing with Jillian Kreinbring.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose is not to say, hey, look at, we're scientists and we know all this information. It's pretty much to say, wow, let's look at what is good research and what is pseudoscience, and why do we want to believe so much in that? And why do really smart people still lean towards information that is really not accurate? Right. And we're almost driven sometimes like a moth to a flame with certain information, and it has a lot to do with our own biases. You have biases, I have biases. You're not a good scientist if you don't recognize that you have biases. So if nothing else, then that's one of the things I love about your show, is that there's so many different vantage points in talking to different people from different walks of life that you can recognize your own biases just by listening, if you listen critically.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So actually, I'm going to talk about a unique bias that you and I have. I believe this is the first episode on the podcast where we have two diagnosed neurodivergent people sitting across from each other.
I knew there was some sort of affinity from the beginning. Yeah.
So I bring that up because information about
how our brains work is really important. And I know you were diagnosed before I was. You've had that information about your own brain and your own constitution longer than I have. But for me, the information has been like unbelievably liberating and helps me understand how I move through the world, which is why I think also why I'm so passionate about equine neuroscience information getting out in the world, because horses have their own, they have their own neuroscience different to ours. But I bring this up because as two neurodivergent people, we understand the concept of masking. And we were talking before about this. What's the horse equivalent of masking?
Yeah, they're very stoic. They can be. Not always, but
My mare lady would argue not all horses are.
And that's a survival mechanism. And for us too, it's a survival mechanism. We learn social mimicry. That's our survival mechanism. By social mimicry, we pick up little behaviors that we know are acceptable.
Yes.
Because in our world, and like the horse, I think we're more honest. What I mean by that is not that we're better people in being more honest, but we don't quite understand the social nuances of not telling the truth.
Yeah.
Right. So as a kid, when, my teacher might say, well, since last semester, I put on a few pounds. Or I'd say, well, yeah, I agree with you. I think you're really getting quite chubby. And I would get in trouble for things like that,
Yeah.
that I thought was in a social interaction, but I didn't know all the appropriateness until I started to mimic other people around me. I had enough awareness to know that's not really me, though, that I'm putting out there. And so I think as a protective strategy, horses can put out behaviors that allow them to survive, stoicism being one,
Yes.
right? That match. Not that they're thinking that through. It's part of their makeup, like it's part of our makeup.
Yeah. And we do that why? Because with neurodivergence, I think people learn to mimic so that they can establish a sense of safety or a sense of acceptance, social acceptance, which for us as human beings equals safety, right?
Our brains, our horses' brains, have one purpose. That's to help us adapt in the world, right? And so the more strategies we can accumulate that allow us to adapt to our world around us, the better. It's safer. It takes less energy.
Mm-hmm.
We do that, and our horses do the same thing. And our brains are constantly predicting. We used to think of the brain just as a thinking organ, but the newer research is now showing they're predictive organs. What they do with your worlds is you're always saying, how is this going to turn out? What's the next moment
Totally
going to be like? You're thinking, what am I going to say in response to what Dr. Peters says? So you're always putting yourself like one step into the future. Now, if things are predictable, they're readable. If you're predictable to your horse, you're readable. If you're readable, you're safe.
Correct.
Right? I can predict what's going to happen here. I'm safe. If you predict something bad and nothing bad happens, now you have to go back and you have to recalibrate your thinking. And if you do it again to test that theory out and nothing bad happens, now you go back and you recalibrate again. And a number of things are happening at that point. You're myelinating. One of your favorite words. I can see you smiling. Should we tell people what myelination is?
Please tell everybody what myelination is.
Okay. Myelin is a fatty lipid wrapper that wraps around a neuron. How do we get them? We get them by firing neurons. So if we fire neurons in doing a task, if I move my left hand, my right motor strip has a bunch of axons and neurons going to allow that to happen. So if I'm a baby, if I'm a foal, I'm just doing that randomly. But after a while, I start to hone in on that. How does that behavior get so precise? Well, it's because it's using more and more of the main highway. The main highway gets created by these things. Here's our fancy word for the day: oligodendrocytes.
Oh, wow.
Oligodendrocytes are cells that help us build our pathway. So oligodendrocytes get excited. Wow, this neuron is fired 6, 7 times. Let's go down there and see what's going on. So the oligodendrocytes get down there and say, they're using this pathway a lot. Let's wrap it with myelin, like paving a highway. So you used to have this old country road, and then it gets paved and it's a 1-lane highway. If you use it enough, it becomes a super highway. So why would we want to myelinate our highway? One, it's very efficient. Information travels faster. Neurons that are naked, without a myelin wrapper, information travels about 2 miles an hour. A myelinated neuron, 200 miles an hour.
Wow.
So that's the POV lane for your messages.
Yeah.
Versus those that get cluttered. Here.
And our horses myelinate
Right.
just as much as we do, right?
Yeah, but here's the caveat. If you're making your horse do something, you are going to fire neurons, and those neurons are eventually going to get myelinated. But how precisely and whether you're myelinating the right things is up to you, because you can myelinate the bad things too.
Yeah.
You get a big old horse onto the trailer and it knocks you down and goes grazes. You say, that didn't turn out very well. So you go get the horse and you put him on the trailer, and again, they knock you down and go graze. Pretty soon, and this is important, because we'll call the horse bad names: defiant, aggressive, disrespectful. Well, how about this? How about that horse is using a myelinated pathway that I don't want them to use,
Right.
which is actually more accurate, right?
Yeah.
So to the horse, I step into this dark box, and then I push the human out of the way and I go eat grass.
Yeah.
This is great.
That sounds like
I've done it 3 times and it's worked 3 times.
Yes.
Here's something cool in the brain. There's an area in the brain called the basal ganglia. If you've done something a few times and it's worked, the basal ganglia will say, you know what? I got this. Give it to me. And so other areas of the brain can go offline. When you're learning to drive and you're looking at the mirror and the speed limit and all that, your brain's lit up. But after a short amount of time, you got this. And the basal ganglia says that as well. Well, you have this. You don't need to start thinking about your boyfriend. Think about all the neurodivergent things that are going on in your life and how you're coping. But
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about driving.
So that's like when we go into cruise control, that
Right.
concept of,
Now you can still go back online. If somebody cuts in front of you, then you can pull those other brain areas that you need. But for the most part, the basal ganglia has it. So with our horse, there's habits that get put in place we're not even aware of,
right.
right? And
Because they're myelinating when we're not around them either.
exactly. And oftentimes what we put a lot of emotion into, we label a behavior when it's a habit.
Yeah.
And so there are horses that you pick up their hind foot and they're going to kick, and they're not kicking because they're distressed. They're not kicking because they're threatened or afraid. They're kicking because that's now a habit. The basal ganglia is saying, yeah, I feel that elevation in my back hoof, and I just do this.
Yes.
And then it goes away. So oftentimes we blame a horse, and then I would ask people, well, who put that in there? Who programmed that?
Yeah.
Right? We did in how we set that up. So the brain is always sensing, the brain is always changing, the brain is always rewiring. So everything we do, the environment that we bring to that horse's brain, and knowing their brains grow by experience, and that brain is always trying to figure out the best way to adapt in the world, then our movement and our voice, not our language, our movement and our voice, our breathing, all of that gets sensed by that organism on the other side. So we are so profoundly impactful to the horse. And how sensitive are they? Well, I would encourage your listeners to look up the story of Clever Hans.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
Right.
And he's come up a number of times in the podcast from other guests as well, because he is such a profound case study.
Very quickly, I can just tell you that Hans's owner, who was a professor, would put out a piece of wood, and then he would actually give Hans a math problem. 8 + 2, what does that equal? And then Hans would bang out with his hoof 10 messages and then stop. And people said, look at this, is amazing. This horse is doing algebra. This horse is doing arithmetic.
Yeah.
Well, what they discovered was Hans was not doing arithmetic. He was reading. He was reading micro movements. He was reading breathing. He was reading what was going on with the professor. And the professor, not purposely, not consciously, was giving off some message to Hans
about what the right answer.
Where the relief comes.
Yes.
Right? And it became a scandal. And everybody said, oh, look at this horse, really, it can't do arithmetic. No.
But he can do something so much more impressive.
Absolutely. And Hans is not an example of this special, fantastic horse, although it is quite amazing. All horses have a sensory system that's very, very similar.
So talking about sensory and nervous system, because when we talk about, and this is what's so exciting, is when we explore, you and I, when we explore our own neurodivergence, you can't help but also start to discover and explore and understand the human nervous system, right? Because the sensitivities that exist often in neurodivergent individuals makes you have all these, quote unquote, superpowers, but it also makes certain aspects of life, especially modern life, really challenging. And then I can't help but immediately think about horses and think about the sensitivity that their nervous system has and the world that they have to live in. So I want to talk about nervous systems, and I want to talk about how they interact with and how they partner up with the brain, because this is a really important, and I'm so glad, I feel like the horse world is really diving into the importance of nervous system regulation and understanding what state a horse is in, but then also understanding that their own nervous system matters, right? That we can't look and study and be aware of and train with a horse's nervous system without doing the same with our own, right?
There have been plenty of studies that show the impact of a nervous human on a horse, or the impact of, an aggressive human with a horse. So there's really no question, and I don't think there would be with any of your listeners, that your nervous system is going to have an impact on the horse. I think where the question comes up is, well, how, to what extent is my nervous system impacting the horse? Well, it depends. If we've nurtured the horse to be very sensitive to our signals, and our signals are given subtly, and your horse is picking that up, that same horse over time, if we've been handling them roughly, if we've been sloppy in our signals, they can start to tune that out. And what happens is sympathetic arousal, the heightened state in the nervous system that goes a little too far, starts to create noise, and the horses shift from I'm safe to defensive physiology. So now they're in a hyper alert state, more so than they were prior. And so that can go one of two ways. One, now any signal could potentially send them off the roof.
Yep.
Right? Or that signal doesn't even get acknowledged because it's so lost in the noise. Here's all this emotional noise. And here's the signal.
Yeah.
Now there's so much emotional noise. So that's when somebody says, well, man, I better spur them. I better do something to give. So they recognize that signal. Well, we create more noise, more sympathetic arousal, and we're actually sending them up the wrong way. But people feel when they get stuck, a lot of people, when they get stuck because they don't understand the nervous system, their solution is more pressure.
Yeah.
And almost always the answer lies in letting the nervous system reset. So by using that as our solution, we're actually sending the horse the wrong way,
Yes.
not the way we want to.
I think one of the greatest equine training hacks of all time is learning and understanding how to train a horse to downregulate.
Yeah.
And I think of all the things I've witnessed over the last year and a half, and especially when we did our big road trip across the country, one of the most fascinating things that I saw exhibited by incredible masters was how to train and mentor a horse to downregulate. And some horses over time, they learn themselves. Like I think they actually learn through coping. They build survival tools to help them, and they can learn themselves. But I think the great masters, the reason why some horses are able to thrive within the structures and the systems that we've placed in front of them is because they've been mentored to be able to be in a challenging or new situation and then to have access to their nervous system in a way that allows them to downregulate, to be able to have access to their faculties, right?
But have access to their faculties is really a key point here. Yeah, to have access to the options, because if you stress them enough, just like you, if you're under enough pressure, if I point a gun at you and say, solve these math problems or I'll shoot you, even if you know the answer,
Yes.
you may be stressed to the point that you don't have that option anymore. Your mind goes blank. So, and we can't take our horse and say, you will relax, damn it.
Yes. Right.
So it is an exercise, and it's in the literature, they call it pendulation. What we're doing is nervous system training. So we kind of, yes, you can use techniques and they work. And yes, you can use methods and they work, some better than others. And some of those actually are counteractive. They're not really helpful. But if we can get the nervous system to work with us instead of us working against that nervous system, that opens up curiosity. That opens up, the horse feels, it facilitates their exploration. They can become super learners. And believe me, that's where they want to go.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, before we get back into the conversation, I want to share something that has genuinely changed the way I feed my horses. One of my horses, Lady, who I talk a lot about on this podcast and who some of you know, is a sassy Appaloosa and a notoriously picky eater. She does not like feed with a lot of fillers or chemicals. She is sensitive in every way, including her skin, which has always made feeding her a careful process. She lets me know quickly when something does not agree with her. Finding a feed that she could eat consistently and that supports her overall well-being has mattered more to me than anything else. Total Equine by Total Feeds has been that feed. When I first tried Total Equine, I was super skeptical. It looks more like kibble than pellets, and I judged the look of it right away. Also, it's affordable. And as someone who's grown up deep in the competitive world of show jumping, I immediately interpret quality with price. Nothing in the horse world can be both good quality and affordable, right? Well, wrong. My horses have never looked better, and they love it. Thanks to important trace minerals like copper, zinc, and selenium, Lady's digestion is steadier than ever. Her weight is great, her coat quality improved measurably, and her top line has stayed intact, even with time off after our epic road trip across the country. That alone would have been enough to earn my trust. But that trust was tested in a big way when we took Lady and Galano across the country. Traveling over 25,000 miles with your horses demands consistency and nutritional integrity to balance the stress and demands of the road. Having a feed I could rely on no matter what made a huge difference. Total Equine kept both my horses nourished and settled through long hauls, new environments, and constant change. They're one of the only horse feeds in the industry to use Norwegian kelp, providing essential iodine, minerals, prebiotics, and thyroid support. I cannot say enough good things about Total Equine by Total Feeds. Developed by Dr. Harry Anderson, who I now consider a friend and ally in the fight for good horse care in this time of inflated prices and impossible economics in the horse world. I am careful about what I recommend, especially when it comes to nutrition. I've never spoken publicly about horse feed before, and I am proud to speak up now. Total Feeds has earned its place in my barn because it supports my horses in a way that is noticeable, measurable, and reliable. If you want to learn more about their approach to feeding, visit totalfeeds.com or pick up a bag at your local Tractor Supply.
It facilitates their exploration. They can become super learners. And believe me, that's where they want to go.
Yeah, they do.
They want to go there. Why do they want to go there? Well, we challenge them. We challenge them and they feel uncomfortable. So now their sympathetic nervous system is aroused, highly aroused. At that point, they're aroused, so they're paying attention. So we have another neurochemical that comes on board, acetylcholine. Acetylcholine helps us to laser focus. Okay, we've mixed this cocktail, as Martin would like to say. We've mixed this cocktail, so we have norepinephrine that's got us excited.
Yeah.
Acetylcholine, we're focused. When we're at that state and we accomplish something, and then we come down and realize we were safe,
Yes.
right? That's our biggest dopamine hit.
Yes.
So dopamine is so addicting. Our horses don't want that little teeny dose anymore when they know, if I'm challenged, where I can explore and I'm curious, I'm safe enough to get up there. I want to get up to the top rung in the ladder again so I can get that big dopamine hit. Actually, they just keep regulating themselves so they're getting higher and higher and higher till you reach those horses that Martin calls special forces horses.
Yeah.
He says, I don't know what I could do to panic this horse because the horse is so comfortable up there. It's a day in the office, but they're so willing to do what I'm asking because they're getting highly rewarded.
I call them solution-seeking horses.
Yeah.
And I learned that you can tell the difference between a horse that has been mentored to, they know that they have a positive hit, a dopamine hit at the end of solving this question. It's very powerful to witness that.
Let's say that I say to myself, I don't want my horse figuring stuff out. I'm in charge here,
Right.
right? So we're going to do this like I say we're going to do it, and we're going to drill it until you got it. So what happens there? Well, the horse might get, if your timing's good and your signal's clear, even though it may be a bit more than you need, but your signal's clear, the horse will understand that and get its release.
Yeah.
Right. And so they get a dopamine hit. Maybe not as big as being challenged and coming down safely because they've been able to use an internal locus of control. They've solved that problem. I did it. They don't say that, but their nervous system says that. So I do this a second time, and a third time. No horse, you don't have that right. A fifth time. By about the fifth time, each time we're getting progressively less dopamine.
Yeah.
Till we reach the sixth or seventh time, now we're getting no dopamine. The horse's prediction is, this sucks. And they start thrashing their tail. They start getting agitated, but we're just going to drill them through that, right? And they're going to comply, perhaps, and now they're just robotic. they've got fragments of what you're teaching because their brain is so busy trying to cope with an unpleasant situation that under pressure, lots of that is likely to go away. So that horse that's been pendulated and gone up and down and gets really comfortable being challenged and aroused, that other horse who's in ways sort of shutting down. They're shutting down their nervous system. They're only listening to that one signal that you want, and you may say that that's what you want, and you may get the robotic behavior that you want, but allostatically coping, it's a burden on their nervous system. So if you want that kind of horse, they have them. They're in the carousel. You can go put a quarter in those horses in front of the grocery store and ride them up and down, right?
Yeah.
But these are living creatures.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about them, to me, is that like us, they have good days, they have bad days. Their nervous system state is not always the same. On a windy day, if they're sore, their nervous system is always in a different state. If we recognize that and meet that, then it's amazing the horse that knows that you know that.
Yeah.
And what can come out through. And I think we've, they used to say, well, you only use 10% of your brain. It's ridiculous. You have to use your entire brain. And our brains today really aren't, if we used them 100%, we still couldn't handle everything that's coming at us. But horses, we've never or rarely given them the benefit of the doubt and allow them. When I say let your horse have an internal locus of control, let them choose, what I'm saying is not, oh, well, Dr. Peters says just let your horse go do whatever they want to, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying let the horse know that its behavior matters, right? Because that's what happens to a horse in learned helplessness. They learn that their behavior doesn't matter.
I want you to explain from a neuroscientific level, from a point of view of science, what's happening to the brain when a horse arrives in a state of learned helplessness?
Basically. And these go back to experiments you can read about. They're no longer ethical. You can't do them anymore. But Dr. Marty Seligman in the early 70s.
Oh, is this the dog experiment?
This is the dog experiment.
This one.
Yeah.
It's so hard to hear.
But this is where we came up with the term learned helplessness, where you had a dog and you might have an electrified grid under the dog, and you could turn on half of the grid. So you had a light bulb over the half and labeled this A, and you had a light bulb over B, the second part of the grid. And what he would do is and it had a barrier between A and B. He'd send an electric shock through the grid, and the dog would feel the shock and jump over to B, where the shock stopped. Then he would turn on the light bulb over B, so the dog knew electricity's coming, and might not be fast enough, get shocked and jump over to A, but learn that it could get away from A.
Yeah.
Initially, nobody wants to get shocked, so there were increased cortisol, there were stress hormones in the dog being shocked. But what they learned is if the dog had an internal locus control, could make a decision where its behavior mattered, it could jump over and get away from the shock, the cortisol levels went down. The dog basically said, I'm in control of this. If I have something that's aversive, I have something that's painful, I have something that's threatening to my nervous system, I can get away from it with this behavior.
So do you say that would be like an equivalent of empowerment? Like that when trainers talk about horses learning that they can control pressure, right? Which is uncomfortable. Pressure inherently is uncomfortable on like whether it's a mildly uncomfortable or highly uncomfortable. But when trainers talk about horses that feel empowered because they learn how to control pressure, that's what you're talking about. That quick reduction in cortisol
the horse's brain actually senses that it's training us, right? I can make that go away.
Right.
I just do this. My behavior matters. And I figured this out.
Cool.
Right?
Okay.
Learned helplessness. Dr. Seligman turned on the entire grid. So this dog frantically would jump to B, I'm still getting shocked. Jump to A, I'm still getting shocked. Jump back to B. Here's how learned helplessness occurs. It's aversive stimuli that's inescapable. And your behavior does not matter. There's no way. So it's got to be inescapable pressure that there's just no way that your behavior can do anything about it. What did the dogs do? They realized that. They hovered in the corner, urinated on themselves, began to shake, and they stopped jumping over to get away from the shock. Dr. Seligman started the experiment over, put these dogs back in A, lit up the light bulb. The dogs stayed there and took the shock. Would not respond because they've learned their behavior didn't matter. Many of these dogs never recovered. They were depressed, they were shaken, they wouldn't come out of their shell. And so that's what learned helplessness. It's become inescapable. So I'm not going to respond to the world. I'm just going to check out because it doesn't matter. My behavior doesn't matter.
And this is why it's so important. I have a hard time listening to that story every time, but it's so important because it highlights that we don't want robotic horses. We don't want horses that learn that their behavior doesn't matter, because behavior is communication, right? Horses are communicating to us on moment to moment where they are in their nervous system, right? What state they are currently in, and that state will determine what they're capable of doing and where they're capable of meeting us.
What we do is we make judgments on what we see, and that makes sense. But what we see is often way down the line from what's going on inside.
Yeah.
So if I had a way of measuring what some of those horses are saying, they'd call us out. Look at, this is creating tremendous amounts of cortisol. My immune system's being harmed. When it comes to dopamine, I can hardly feel it because I'm already filled with other stress hormones. So there's not much point to life. And now we have this structure called the 5 domains. And number one in there is internal locus of control, having some what we call agency. Mm-hmm. So you have some say-so in your world. Every creature needs to have some say-so in their world. They need to know their behavior matters. If not, you're just a slave carrying those big bricks up to build the pyramid, right?
Yeah.
And you'll get whipped no matter what you do.
It must be a sense of biological survival state, because you must, like, in the same way that a horse can shut down, and I know you're gonna tell me what the scientific term for this is because they are prey animals. There's a mechanism that takes place in their body when they get taken down by predators. Their brain shuts off from the feeling that's connected to their body so that they don't suffer as much, correct?
Right. That's a little different.
I know it's different, but what it makes me think of, I know, and I'm not saying that's the same thing, but what I'm thinking of is our bodies, whether they're human bodies or horse bodies, are designed to, when they have been there has to be some sort of sense of, what's the word? Like, the chemicals within our bodies must respond to this helplessness, right? Like, you have to shut down. There has to be some response within the body if there's no way of escaping. Because I'm thinking of, like, the way people have been enslaved in human history. Animals have been enslaved. They've been in inescapable situations. Our bodies have obviously evolved to then, how do you exist in that state, right? And there's obviously a mechanism that takes place in which you kind of your brain shuts down, because if your brain shuts down, or if your nervous system shuts down, then you're at least minimizing the level of pain that you can experience. Is that correct?
Yeah. What you're describing is something called the freeze response. And there's a name for it that evades me at the moment in the literature. But and typically the pains involved too, nociceptive signals. So they go to an area called the paraaqueductal gray matter. Actually,
Oh yeah,
I
we
just
can bring
happen to have a
out.
brain on me.
This is my favorite part.
Okay, yeah. So here's an aqueduct, and para just means around. So paraaqueductal, and there's gray matter in this structure here. What happens there? Well, it seems that pain signals that go there can actually create a narcotic, an opioid in your system. So some of those messages go to the amygdala for fear, and then we get the HPA axis, hypothalamus sends signals to the pituitary, sends signals to the adrenal glands, and they pump us full of cortisol. If you mix that with oftentimes with pain signals, or we get too much sympathetic arousal and the messages go to the paraaqueductal gray matter, basically we just stop fighting. So that animal that gets knocked down and it's going to be eviscerated by the tiger or lion and going to rip out their innards, there may be a switch that gets tripped. And what happens is there's a parasympathetic crash. People think of sympathetic, that must be bad. Well, sympathetic nervous system, we need that for learning. We need sympathetic arousal for play. Parasympathetic is good. Yeah, that's homeostasis. But below that is this, what we call like ventral vagal or vasovagal response, where you can faint from being
Yes.
overloaded.
Yes, I've seen that happen in human. Yeah.
And in that state, it's a survival mechanism where the animal just checks out and they're filled with opioids that act as a narcotic. So if you're going to die, at least you're not going to feel it to the same extent that you normally would. So when we do things like lay a horse down,
Yeah.
one, are we creating some form of learned helplessness where it doesn't matter what I do, my behaviors? We do know with using variable heart rate monitors, oftentimes we lay them down, there is a parasympathetic crash. Those horses do look like they've been doped after they get back up again or when they're just lying there still. So what may, for our convenience, make it look like, and well, let's add terms in here. Oh, this is bonding. Now they trust me. No, those are our words. How can you scientifically say that that's what occurred? It's your interpretation of what you think is happening with words. Words fall short when we're dealing with measurements of the nervous system, right? That's actual electrochemical firings. That's actual tissue doing things. And we can't label something we don't quite understand yet. So the literature still and research is still looking into those responses, but I don't know how different that is from, let's say, a human is assaulted and the lawyer says, well, why didn't you run away from your assailant? Well, they held me down. Well, why didn't you fight them? Well, I did, but they held my arms. I couldn't fight. So you just laid there and took it.
Yeah.
Well, that was a nervous system decision, not a conscious decision. That was the nervous system's response.
I actually really want you to emphasize this because I guarantee there's going to be someone listening to this episode or watching this episode who has experienced this, and they may have shame around when people say, well, why didn't you fight back? Or why didn't you respond more violently? Or why did you just take it? I want you to explain, I want you to really emphasize this, Steve, because I think it's really important for not only for humans to understand for themselves, but for their horses.
Yeah.
That level of compliance that comes from the nervous
Right.
system.
These are switches, like a toggle switch. You don't know how you're going to respond. You know, if all of a sudden I let a lion loose in here, you don't know, really. You may think, well, I'll run away, or I'll get so amped up I'll fight it, or will I just freeze in place? Soldiers going into combat don't know that either. So it's not a conscious decision, and certainly isn't a moral one. But when we make those moral things, that horse had heart, that horse had courage, um, that may color it somewhat, but that's not really accurate. I mean, you can think of so many different countries where they have 20 words to describe one thing, and then we have one or two. But we think we're talking about the same thing, but
Yeah, English is quite limiting in that way, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. And here's what often happens is people will often disassociate.
Mm.
What will happen is the brain says, this is so horrendous. It's not a conscious decision. This is so horrendous. I can't escape it. I need to go somewhere else. And they do. Their body may be there experiencing the assault, but their mind has to go somewhere else so that they can live through it.
Does that happen in horses? Do we know if
That's very interesting, isn't it? We are getting pretty sophisticated, and we're getting to use wearable technology
Mm-hmm.
so that you no longer need a big facility with a functional MRI that's stable where you have to stand still. They're wonderful for the neuroimaging, but real life doesn't stand still,
Sure doesn't.
right? And real life interacts with everything around it. So there are things like near infrared spectroscopy. So these would be caps that you wear that's actually looking at the blood oxygen. Why is that important? Well, we don't have to put a dye in you. When you use a certain part of your brain, it needs blood and oxygen. So blood and oxygen will rush to that area. So we're starting to know what areas of your brain you're using, right, to do something. The more we're able to use this and actually work with AI on monitoring this, and now there's something called hyperscanning, which is pretty cool. I just wrote a Substack article on this. Hyperscanning, where we'll look at more than one thing. So let's put an EEG on you. Let's look at neuroimaging. Let's put a heart rate monitor on you. And let's look at movement all together.
Cool.
Because what might be happening is we might be saying, okay, does this cause anxiety? But all we're looking at is the brain.
It's this idea that things don't exist in isolation.
Right. They're systems.
Yeah.
We know they're systems, but we've studied them in isolation. Your horse is going to tell on you in the future, right?
Yeah.
So if you've been forcing your horse to do a lot of things, it's going to take its toll on the nervous system. And the nervous system is going to say, every time this guy comes around, he's sending messages to the amygdala. You know what? Yeah, and he's got me scared. And here he comes again. And my prediction now is that this is not going to be good. So messages go to the amygdala even if they don't have to. So now even in a safe situation, I'm feeling afraid. That dumb horse, he's just so flighty. No, we've done things in such a way that we sent signals there so long that the prediction is this is not going to be good. If somebody punches you a couple times and then they feign a punch and you duck, you don't say, well, look at that idiot. I wasn't going to punch them. But the nervous system already, even though it's safe. Mm-hmm. And then somebody else, an 80-year-old elderly person can come up and pretend they're going to punch, and you still get that reflex that's built in. What I would tell people is that the nervous system is malleable. It's neuroplasticity. We're always rewiring, and you're part of that rewiring. And so we could get what we want to if all we want is a behavior. But behavior's so far down the line, I don't know that we're being aware of the toll and wear and tear we put on the nervous system. And if we went about it a different way and worked with the nervous system, we would get performance and behavior so far beyond. So when they talk about your horse being a willing partner,
Yeah.
these horses would be saying, let me be involved in this. Let me show you something about an internal locus of control. All right, this is the horse's brain cut in half.
We're stopping here. And part 2, Stephen puts a real horse brain on the table, sliced in half, and shows me exactly what's happening inside a horse trained with agency versus a horse trained without it. If the access and insight of this podcast makes you want to go deeper and actually apply these ideas with your own horses, NF Plus is where I've brought together some of the best riders, trainers, horsemen, horsewomen, sports psychologists, and practitioners in the horse world. Inside the NF Plus app, you'll find more than 70 masterclass courses on the challenges so many of us face. Spooky horses, finding a distance, developing a better canter, developing feel, navigating fear and anxiety, or becoming a more thoughtful rider and horse person. Our instructors include Tick Maynard, Will Coleman, Carl Cook, Peter Wild, Dr. Jenny Susser, Ann Krasinski, and so many more. I created NF Plus as a safe, thoughtful place to learn at your own pace, with teachers and riders who have a wealth of knowledge. You can explore more at noelfloydplus.com or find the link to download the app in the show notes.